This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I hear fewer people joining in at this point, and it's 11:31, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the February PI Coordinator Call. Next slide. Here is our agenda for today. We'll start off, as always, with a recruitment update. We'll move on to a few general study updates. We'll talk about the study outcomes and the outcome certification form, and then we'll give you a sneak preview of the protocol amendment that was just approved. And then next month in early March, we'll be doing a full training on that protocol amendment. In terms of recruitment activity, we had 210 patients randomized as of January 31st. As a reminder, our target is 425 patients. So likely by the end of the week this week, we will meet our 50% recruitment target, which is quite a milestone. We have 34 sites who have recruited at least one patient, and 8 sites have not recruited any patients yet. And I am in the process this week of reaching out to all 8 of those sites to see if we can convert them over. Children's Hospital of the King's Daughter in New York remains our recruitment leader with 17 participants randomized, and Cincinnati Children's is very close on the heels with 16 participants randomized. A special shout out to Lurie in Chicago for being the only site to randomize a patient in December. And not only that, they randomized 2 patients within days of each other in what was otherwise a quiet month. So that's awesome. Next slide. We've had a number of centers enrolling patients in January, including Iowa, Kravis Children's in New York, Omaha, Nationwide, King's Daughter, Pediatric Specialists of Virginia, Nemours Orlando, and Michigan. And a special shout out to Orlando, who randomized their first patient in January. So for all of you, keep up the good work. This is exactly how we need to kick off our 2019. Next slide. This graph here shows our cumulative enrollment by month. The blue line at the bottom is the number of patients randomized. The green at the top is our goal. And so you can see here that we had hoped to be done with recruitment in October, and this obviously hasn't happened, but we continue to make slow and steady progress. I suspect that we will have about 1 more year to get the job done, thanks in part to the protocol amendment that we'll talk about later. And so if we are going to reach our target sample size, we really need to, all of us really need to kick it up a half a notch to a full notch. And I think we can do that. Next slide. A couple of general study updates. Hopefully by now you all know about the Spring Community Conference in Dallas. These slides and the newsletter have a link to register. We'll be having a combined lunch on Saturday. So if you are able to come to the meeting in person, please join us for lunch on Saturday. This lunch session will be a bonus session. It won't be a mandatory session. We won't be recording it or having it available for dial in for people who are remote. It's just sort of a bonus fun session for those of you who are in town for the community conference. However, what will be mandatory is the PI and coordinator call next month, as always, the first week of the month. Because we are doing a protocol retraining, these calls will be extended and they will be a full hour call rather than the usual 30 minutes. We will be covering the new protocol, some minor consent form changes, and a new process to talk about protocol deviations. And as a reminder, these calls will be on March 5th from 8 to 9 a.m. East Coast time, or March 7th from 11 to noon East Coast time. Please, please, please attend these calls. If you are a coordinator, make sure your PI attends the call. If you are a PI, make sure your coordinator attends the call. They are mandatory. We will be collecting training logs that you have attended. It will be far better to attend one of the live internet-based meetings, but if need be, these will be recorded and you can view them on your own time and sign off on the training log using the honor system. Next slide. A little bit about biosample collection. So samples will be collected or are collected at visit 3, which corresponds to roughly week 14, and visit 9, which corresponds to roughly week 91. If for some reason biosamples aren't collected at these visits, you can collect them at the following visit. Sometimes a patient will have a unscheduled or additional visit between the two, and it's fine to collect the biosamples then as well. Just a reminder, if you are collecting samples on a Monday through a Thursday, no processing is required. You don't need to centrifuge them. Just ship the tubes directly to the UNC Biobank by FedEx. The only thing you need to do after the collection of samples is to simply invert the tube 5 times, place them upright, let them sit undisturbed for at least 30 minutes. That's it, put them in the mail, and we can do all of the processing in the central lab. Next slide. If by chance you are collecting samples on a Friday, in which case the biospecimen receiving facility is not open over the weekend, or if by chance you're collecting it on a holiday, then it is totally fine to process these samples and send them off to the biobank. That's not a requirement. If you know it's a Friday and you don't want to deal with or don't have the capability of processing, just grab a sample at the next visit. That may well be easier for you. But if you do want to grab a sample on a Friday and process it, that's fine. Just make sure that everything is labeled and rubber banded together as described here. So pair the red top serum separator tubes with their serum aliquots and the gold top serum separator tubes with their respective aliquots, so we know which of the aliquots come from which tubes. We have not supplied you with 2 milliliter aliquots, so you can get them from your own lab, but please make sure that if you're doing so, they have screw tops and not pop tops. We've had a couple samples shipped to us with pop tops, and the pop popped open and the samples were lost, and everyone was very sad. Next slide. A couple of other new changes coming, and we'll talk much more about this on the March mandatory calls, but we are expanding our deviation log slightly and developing a new process so that sites can submit their deviation logs electronically on a monthly basis rather than wait and submit them yearly at the time of continuing review. This was a requirement by the central IRB in order to provide greater study oversight for all of the sites rather than doing so just once a year. We have also reworked the consent signature pages to make them a little bit more clear and user-friendly, both for coordinators or PIs, whoever is obtaining the consent, as well as for patients and families. I think you will all appreciate those changes as well. We've heard from many of you that the existing forms were just a little weird. We've heard that and have worked with the IRB to make this a little bit easier. The Cincinnati Central IRB has a little bit of downtime now while they're upgrading their machinery, but hopefully those new consents should be available in early March. Next slide. Okay, I do want to shift gears a little bit and give everyone a refresher on the combined study endpoints. And again, the two things that we need to make this trial a success are one, recruiting and randomizing participants and getting them in the door. And second, making sure that we follow our patients very closely and collect and record very good data about their endpoints. And if we have good enrollment and good data on endpoints, then we will have conducted a very high quality pragmatic trial and find an answer to this question that is quite reliable and robust. So all of our study endpoints sort of blend together as a composite endpoint, and they all sort of indicate one reason or another that a patient is not doing great on the anti-TNF and their assigned study treatment. So for patients who are randomized and are taking steroids at the time of randomization, we hope that these steroids are tapered and discontinued by week 16, 4 months after randomization. In fact, we hope that these patients are tapered and stop steroids long before that time. As long as the patient has discontinued steroids before week 16, that's great. They are off the hook for meeting this endpoint. If they discontinue steroids by, say, week 8, and at some point later, like week 15, they have to restart steroids, that's okay. They've at least had their initial steroid taper that was successful and have not met this endpoint. Secondly, patients who are hospitalized for abdominal surgery or hospitalized for any other reason related to their IBD after week 25, that is considered to meet a study endpoint. Patients who don't achieve remission at any point before the visit 4 visit or the week 26 visit have met a endpoint. Again, really importantly, like the steroid, if the patient achieves remission early on, like say at the week 4 visit, and then subsequently had a bit of a relapse, that's okay. We just need them to have achieved remission at one point before the week 26 visit. The next one is the short pediatric Crohn's disease activity index greater than or equal to 15 without a non-IBD cause at 2 or more consecutive visits beyond week 4. Again, there are a lot of reasons for the short PCDAI to be elevated. Maybe their general well-being is poor because they broke up with their girlfriend. The providers have a place to check that that's the case and that they don't think that the elevated short PCDAI is related to the Crohn's. Maybe the patient has flu and has diarrhea from the flu. In that case, if they're going to the bathroom 8 times a day and the provider is attributing it to the flu rather than the Crohn's, again, this outcome is not met. Next slide. The next two are use of steroids for a period of more than 10 weeks, cumulatively beyond week 16. Again, this catches these patients that are chronic users of steroids, maybe steroid dependent, maybe have symptoms between visits and their docs are calling in prescriptions for steroids by phone. And then finally, we know that at the discretion of the treating clinician, if a patient is not doing well, if a patient is having side effects, that treating clinician might make the decision to stop the anti-TNF, either for lack of effectiveness or some side effect, or pull them from study drug, either for lack of effectiveness or a side effect. And if in the clinician's determination any of that has happened, for combined purposes, we consider that to be a primary endpoint as well. All of these are indicators that patients just aren't doing as well as we would like them to be doing. I can pause here and take questions or clarifying comments about any of these study endpoints if you'd like. Some of you may be talking and on mute, so you'll have to unmute yourselves. I'll pause for a minute or so and see if we hear any questions before moving on. All right, hearing no questions, I hope that, I guess Josh is saying to use the chat box for questions. I'm going to move on, but if you have any questions related to outcomes, put them in the chat box and we'll cycle back to them later in the call. Next slide. So because the data collection around primary endpoints is so important and really is the lifeblood of our study, we will be sending all sites a outcome verification form. This is a paper form that you will complete and sign and send back to us. I'll give you a screenshot of that later. Just as a reminder, our combined analysis is a time to event analysis. And the event is reaching any of the endpoints that we just discussed in the prior couple of slides and are described in the protocol. For each patient, we need a precise date that the first endpoint or endpoints were met. And again, I will remind you that a lot of times patients meet more than one endpoint at the same time. For example, a patient who is not doing well might be having enough cumulative steroid exposure, and then they come into clinic and have the elevated SPCDAI on 2 occasions, and then the provider decides to stop the Remicade and switch them to another medication, and potentially all of that happened on the same day, in which case the patient may have met all 3 outcomes. What we need is the date that the first outcome was met and which outcome or outcomes were met on that day, and that's what we need to give to our statistician to plug into the analysis. And so Anne is in the process of reviewing all of the data that we have collected in the database, in the provider review forms, and looking to see how things match and trying to resolve discrepancies. She's looking really hard to figure out, where does the provider review indicate that an outcome was met, but we can't find evidence of any of the outcomes in the other data, or where does the data suggest that the patient might have met an outcome, but there isn't any documentation of that in the provider review. And she'll be getting in touch with you all to confirm everything and address those discrepancies. Next slide. And again, as I mentioned, ultimately every patient who meets an outcome is going to get a outcome verification form. Next slide. And that form looks like this. The site name is at the top left. The patient ID is at the top right. The date that the first outcome or outcomes were met is on the left. The date that study drug was discontinued will be on the right. Again, for any patient who meets an outcome, they are supposed to discontinue study treatment and remain in the study as a sort of active put off treatment. The bottom is a place for the provider to check the first outcome or outcomes that the patient has met, and they are all listed here as well to make your lives easy. And we'll be sending these out to you for patients who it looks like have already met an outcome. And what you'll need to do is pull up the patient's record in your electronic health record, review your notes, and just sort of make sure that the right outcome and right date is all set. I just did 3 of these myself on Monday, and each one took about 5 minutes. So it's a relatively painless process. Going forward, this form is now posted on SharePoint. And so as you recognize that a patient meets an outcome, you can be super proactive and fill in this form right when you notice that they're meeting an endpoint, right when you are stopping their study treatment. Send this form over to Anne. She will look at your data, make sure that the data supports the outcome that the patient has met, and everything will be hunky-dory. So doing this in real time may save a little bit of cleanup time later on. Any questions about the outcome certification form? Have any sites received these yet other than mine? If so, were the directions clear and straightforward? Do we need to clarify things for other sites? How painful or painless of a process has it been? I know we've sent out a couple forms to a couple sites, so if any of you have any early reactions, please let us know. Either good reactions or bad reactions, please let us know. And again, either speak up or type it into the chat box, or you can always contact us offline.
Hey, Mike, this is Lynette at Nemours, Jacksonville. Will we need to do this form for the ones that were out a while ago? Or is this just new?
So we're playing catch up now. And so for all of the 3 ones that I did myself this week happened, a year ago, 18 months ago, whatnot. So we're doing a catch up period now, and then going forward, it'll just be sort of trying to track it in real time.
Okay, thanks.
And like I mentioned, for me, it took about 5 minutes per patient because some of these events did happen a while ago, and there was a little bit of cobwebs in my brain. But going forward, it should be even easier. All right, next slide. Okay, a little bit about the protocol amendment that was approved by the Central IRB on January 26th. We'll be sending a copy of this to all sites in the next couple of weeks, and we'll need the signature page signed and returned. And again, we will be doing the coordinator and PI extended training calls next month. Next slide. The biggest change with the protocol amendment is that rather than having a 24-month fixed follow-up for all participants, we have changed the follow-up period to be a little flexible, with a minimum follow-up of 12 months and a maximum follow-up of 36 months. And there are really 2 reasons for this. The first is that it will essentially allow us to recruit patients for a longer period of time, and we need all the time we can get. If you think about it, if all patients were followed for 2 years, we would need to have the last patient enrolled 2 years before the funding ends. If the minimum follow-up is only 12 months, then we can have the last patient enrolled 12 months before the funding ends. And so it just gives us an extra year to recruit from, and we clearly need that. Additionally, by extending follow-up to up to 36 months, it gives us the ability to follow patients even longer and collect even more long-term data, because Crohn's disease is a chronic illness and patients are in it for the long run. While 2 years is a very long trial by IBD standards, 3 years would be even more awesome. Next slide. What we've planned for the 3rd year is much like the 2nd year, if not even more simple. Quarterly visits in year 3, just like in year 2, and biosamples will not be collected in year 3. So again, we've really tried to make this as straightforward as possible. Next slide. So in terms of consent issues, we will be having a new consent that we will distribute to you all, and any new patients that are enrolled, say, after March, will sign the new consent, and that new consent will sort of explain that follow-up will be for up to 3 years or until the study ends, whichever happens first. For current patients who signed the original consent and are completing or near completing their 2nd year of follow-up, they will have the option of signing the new consent and remaining in the study for an additional year, or completing the original 2 years that they agreed to complete and moving on after that. If for patients who agreed to stay in the study for a 3rd year, we'll just get you to have them sign the reconsent form. Important here, for patients who met an outcome like we spent the first half of our call talking about, those patients will only be followed for the 2 years. We won't be doing a third year of follow-up for those patients who have already met a endpoint, an outcome. Next slide. Other protocol changes, we've clarified a little bit about the procedures for unblinding at the end of the study. Patients who are still undergoing treatment with study medication at the time the study closes or who reach the week 156 mark will be unblinded, or for patients who are consented and they reach the 24-month mark and don't wish to consent for the additional year will be unblinded. So kind of the same situation applies. If you finish your 2 years and you want to be done with the study, we'll unblind you then. If you finish your 2 years and you want to go on for a third year, we will unblind you after that third year. If you sign the new consent and the study ends a year into your follow-up, we will unblind you then. Basically, whenever the patient completes the study, the unblinding will be made. And just as a reminder, because I know some of you have patients who have just completed their 24 months of study, that unblinding process is up and running and should be available to you all. If you have any questions with navigating that, please do let us know. The revised protocol also just add a little bit of clarity about PROs and PRO collection. And we specifically stated that if for some reason you don't get it in clinic, you can do it by US mail, you can do it by email, you can do it by fax, you can do it at the next visit. All of that is fine. And please do send your PRO forms to the PRO Coordinating Center at CHOP, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, as soon as you collect them. Don't keep them or batch them. We would love to get them in as close to real time as possible. Next slide.
Mike, just to pause real quick for a question. Alicia was asking, so new patients, will they have the option to still be only followed for 2 years, or will they be followed for 3 years?
New patients will be followed for 3 years according to the protocol. At any point in time, though, patients are always able to change their mind and withdraw from the study. That's that's always the option that patients have. But the intent is to follow for the full 3 years or until the study ends. And we're a little bit at the mercy of the funding agency as to when they decide to terminate the study. We might also terminate the study due to interim analyses for either efficacy or safety that the Data Safety and Monitoring Board do. But the intent is to follow patients for the full 3 years. Good question. And this is just our reminder of who's who with Combine. Again, these slides are always posted on SharePoint. We always have a little bit of staff turnover, so if you need to know who to contact for what, here you go. And of course, you always know how to get in touch with me and Josh and Anne, and we're always happy to point you guys in the right direction as well. We have a minute or two left. If there's any other questions, either by phone or put them into the chat box. Looks like Lynette had a question. So for this third year, it will be a third year on treatment. So for patients who are doing well and have not yet met a study endpoint, we will continue to have the pharmacy send them shipments throughout that third year. For patients who have met an endpoint earlier, then obviously we won't be following them for the third year, and they won't be getting study drug because they've already met a combined endpoint. Other questions? Looks like Kim had a question. Yes. When I say new patients, it's new patients that are consented under the new consent form, and we hope to get all of that rolling next month after our formal training on the protocol amendment and after we get you those new revised consent forms. So if you enroll a patient next week, that's awesome. Please do. You can even enroll a patient tomorrow. That would be even better. But use your existing consent form. They will be enrolled under the 2-year plan. And when they reach the end of their 2 years, if they'd like to stay on for a third year, that will be fine. Let me make sure I got the rest of your question. Kim also asked something about a new email for contacts close to your 15 allowed patients and sent an email to update the contract. I don't know when you will be receiving your contract, but the minimum of 15 patients is waived. So please continue to recruit.
Stepped out. Starting the meeting? Okay.
Sorry, someone's talking in the background. But yes, for all of the sites that are still on, recruit. Don't worry about the 15. Get 50 patients, and that would be great. And it looks like someone's going to follow up. Josh is going to follow up with Kim about the contracts. All right, it's 12:02, so we are over time. Thank you all for all of your hard work with Combine. Thank you for joining the call today, and please make sure to make next month's call and the mandatory protocol trainings. Have a good rest of the month.
You too. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.